Research.
Network.
Project.
International.
In our project tracing Syrian refugee return across north-south divides, we have been studying how Syrian refugees become deportable in Denmark, Jordan and Lebanon, and how deportation becomes a central political discourse. What are the key findings of this project?
Well, I think one of the most important findings is actually that the changes in these political discourse, and sometimes also changes in deportation practices, in very different settings. So we've studied Denmark and the broader EU on the one hand, and Jordan and Lebanon on the other, that they clearly influence each other. And that is significant because often these political settings are studied really separately, while our research has shown that these discourses and also the consequences of these discourses travel beyond the direct setting that they originate in. So we've seen how, for instance, in Jordan and Lebanon, they point towards Danish decisions to declare parts of Syria safe for return to justify their own forced return practices. On the other hand, we've seen how actors in the EU actually look at practices on the ground in neighboring countries to justify their own reconsiderations on potential return to Syria. And in these dynamics, it's really important that this is not a unilateral diffusion of particular norms or discourses, but that these really travel in both ways, and that it influences them in both ways. And often this follows a bit of an echo chamber logic, where you will see that a particular discourse on return and deportation originates in one setting, is then picked up to legitimize policies in another setting, and these practices are then again used in yet another setting to legitimize changes in discourse.
So now I'm joined by Annika, the other collaborator of this project, and I wonder what were the methodological strategies and challenges that we encountered.
Yeah, so our research strategy was to talk to and interview different stakeholders, including policymakers, diplomats, state authorities and NGOs working to support refugees, to be able to trace how discourses and practices changed and converged around norms towards the return of refugees across these very different contexts. And now, of course, this was only possible because of the composition of our team, which combined expertise from on human rights and legal expertise, insights from political science, as well as social legal research. And we held very different positionalities, networks and knowledge backgrounds. Also the fact that we were geographically dispersed, so Nadine was based in Lebanon, whereas the rest of us were based in Europe. It enabled us to continuously trace developments as they were so rapidly evolving, despite of which we would not have been able to do had we been, for instance, only doing short stints of fieldwork in one place or the other. In terms of the challenges, of course, the general instability of the region and the political developments, which have been so rapid and overwhelming lately, have impacted our research. And while some of those developments were the focus of our research, of course, this instability and precarity and so on, it was also, the research process itself was also impacted by it. So for instance, our fieldwork in Lebanon was cut short by Israel's invasion of Gaza in October 2023. And we know, of course, that 1 year later, Israel invaded Lebanon, causing mass destruction and displacement, which not only disrupted research, but also fundamentally changed the conditions of life and survival for people living in Lebanon and for refugees and so on.
So Nadine, given that the Assad regime recently fell and also the right-wing populism rising, what are the policy influences and potentially also future avenues that we can reach out with this research?
So, of course, we welcome the fall of the Assad regime, and we hope that it creates the space for those Syrian refugees who wish to return to be able to do so in a voluntary and dignified manner. But we have to keep in mind that it's been a little bit over a month since the regime fell, and the party that is now in power, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, has been designated as a terrorist organization and still faces multiple sanctions, which also prevents early recovery in Syria. And also, we have to keep in mind that refugees did not only flee Assad. Many fled other armed groups and factions that are still prevalent and active in Syria today. So there's no certainty, there's no stability, there's no guarantee of a prolonged peace. So it's quite surprising to see policy decisions already being taken, for example, to freeze the processing of asylum claims. It seems quite premature. And what we found is that most of these refugee policy decisions were based on populist politics rather than international standards and norms and human rights and best practices for good governance. So it's very concerning, and least of all was there any consideration for the rights of Syrian refugees, their humanity, their desires and their needs. So it's really important that we're tracking these policy discourses and the impact that it could have, because there's a very real possibility that there could be a degradation in the implementation of human rights and international norms that would not just affect refugees from Syria, but it could have global consequences. However, I think that, for future research prospects, our research questions actually remain quite relevant because of the ever-changing situation on the ground. So it would be really important and actually critical to be tracing the discourse that is taking place as the situation evolves and trying to prevent negative and harmful policy discourse that could lead to very bad ramifications.
Thank you.